My son slapped me across the face because I was late with dinner. I'll never forget what I did next. I picked up a knife and, well, hold on a minute. You're probably thinking this story's headed somewhere awful, but let me tell you, sometimes life takes turns you never expect. I'm sitting here at my kitchen table in Cleveland, the same worn Formica table where it all happened 3 months ago. My cheek doesn't sting anymore, but Lord knows the memory sure does. You know that feeling when something happens and time just seems to stop? Like the world freezes for a split second before everything changes forever? That's what happened the moment my son's hand connected with my face. I never thought I'd be that kind of mother. The kind who gets pushed around by her own child. The kind who makes excuses when the neighbors notice something ain't right. Oh, he's just having a rough patch. Or, he doesn't mean it. It's the pressure getting to him. I heard those same words from my friend Shirley down at the First Baptist when she'd show up with those suspicious bruises. We'd all sit there after Wednesday Bible study, drinking Maxwell House from styrofoam cups, pretending not to notice. But deep down, we all knew. And still, I never imagined I'd be sitting on the other side of those knowing glances. And before I continue with my story, let me ask you to subscribe to this channel. Besides hearing stories like mine, you'll automatically be entered into the $2,000 giveaway that'll happen when we reach 1,000 subscribers. Just hit subscribe. That's all you need to do, nothing more. Now, where was I? Oh yes. For 40 years, I poured my heart and soul into raising my boy. 40 years of home-cooked meals, washed laundry, bandaged knees, and endless sacrifices. 40 years of, Mom, can I borrow $20? And Mom, can you co-sign this loan? 40 years of putting someone else's needs before my own, only to have them look at me like I'm nothing but a burden. A disappointment. A broken-down old lady who can't even get dinner on the table when she's supposed to. And still, I kept making excuses for him, because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We protect our children, even when they're the ones doing the hurting. I remember when Bobby was little, maybe 6 or 7, sitting at this very table, legs swinging, not quite reaching the floor. "What's for dinner, Mama?" he'd ask, eyes bright with excitement whether I was serving meatloaf, tuna casserole, or just grilled cheese. He'd smile and say, "You make the best food in the whole wide world." Back then, I was his hero. When did that change? When did I go from being his whole world to being nothing but an old lady who couldn't even get dinner on the table at exactly 6 o'clock? That evening, I was running late at Kroger. The lines were backed up something awful, and my arthritis was flaring up something fierce. My knees felt like someone had taken a hammer to them, each step a reminder that I'm not getting any younger. By the time I got to my old Buick, my hands were cramping around the plastic bags, cutting into my fingers. I remember checking the time on that big clock they have above the exit, 5:42. Bobby would be home in 18 minutes, and he'd expect dinner on the table. 18 minutes to drive the 3 miles home, unload the groceries, and get that meatloaf heated up. My stomach tied itself in knots as I started the car. I knew what was coming. The whole drive home, I could feel my heart racing, my palms sweating against the steering wheel of my '98 Buick. Isn't that just the saddest thing? An old woman terrified to go home to her own son. But that's where I was. Every red light felt like a personal attack. Every slow driver in front of me was another minute Bobby would hold against me. By the time I pulled into our driveway on Maple Street, it was 5:56. His pickup truck was already there, which meant he'd come home early. Lord have mercy. I struggled with those grocery bags, my fingers numb and my back screaming, but I hurried as fast as these old legs would carry me. When I pushed open the door with my hip, there he was, standing in the kitchen, arms crossed over his Cleveland Browns t-shirt, face like a thundercloud. At 40 years old, my son still had the temper tantrums of a toddler, but now in a man's body, with a man's strength and a man's rage. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded, not even offering to help with the bags that were cutting off my circulation. I could see him eyeing the clock on the microwave, 6:01, 1 minute late, and you'd think I'd committed a cardinal sin. "I'm sorry, Bobby," I said automatically, the words so familiar they might as well have been tattooed on my tongue. "The store was packed and I don't want excuses," he cut me off, his voice sharp enough to slice through steel. "You know I need to eat at 6. Every day, Mom. It's not that hard. I hurried to put away the cold items, my hands shaking as I rushed to the fridge. One of the bags split, and a can of Campbell's chicken noodle soup rolled across the linoleum floor, coming to rest at Bobby's feet. He didn't bend to pick it up, just stared at me like I was the biggest disappointment God ever put on this earth. I'll have dinner ready in 5 minutes, I promised, my voice small. The meatloaf just needs heating up. 5 minutes? Are you kidding me? He slammed his hand down on the counter, making me jump. I work all day and I ask for one thing, and you can't even do that right. That's when it happened. As I bent down to pick up that can of soup, trying to make myself smaller, he moved toward me. I didn't see it coming. Just felt the sting of his hand across my face, hard enough to knock me sideways against the counter. The soup can clattered away as I caught myself, my palm slapping against the cold countertop. The kitchen went dead silent after that slap, nothing but the soft hum of the refrigerator and my own shocked breathing. My cheek burned something awful, and I could taste blood where my tooth had cut the inside of my mouth. Never in all my born days had my son laid a hand on me like that. Sure, he'd yelled plenty, slammed doors so hard the pictures of his daddy would rattle on the walls, even thrown the TV remote across the room once or twice. But he'd never hit me. Not once in 40 years. I stood there, one hand pressed to my stinging cheek, staring at my son, my baby boy, all grown up into this angry man I barely recognized. The look on his face wasn't even remorse. It was like he was waiting for me to apologize. Like somehow I had made him do this terrible thing. "Mom," he finally said, his voice lower but still hard as granite. "Just get dinner ready." That's when I felt something shift inside me, like tectonic plates grinding beneath the surface. All those years of walking on eggshells, of making myself small, of excusing his behavior. They all crashed down around me in that moment. I looked at him, really looked at him, and thought, who is this man? And what happened to my sweet little boy who used to pick dandelions for me from the yard? Without even thinking about it, my hand reached for the knife block on the counter. My fingers closed around the handle of my good carving knife, the one Ralph, my late husband, had given me for Christmas back in '89. It was still sharp as the day he gave it to me. I'd kept it that way, just like he taught me. "A dull knife is more dangerous than a sharp one, Maggie," he'd always say when I'd watch him sharpen it on that whetstone he kept in the garage. Bobby's eyes widened when he saw that knife in my hand. For the first time in years, I saw something besides contempt in those eyes. I saw fear. Good. Let him be afraid. Let him wonder what his mama might do next. "What are you doing?" he asked, taking a step back, his voice suddenly not so sure of itself. I didn't answer him. Not right away. I just stood there, feeling the weight of that knife in my hand, watching him watch me. The power had shifted, and we both felt it. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't afraid of my own son. Here in Cleveland, we're practical folks. We come from steelworkers and factory hands, people who built things with their bare hands and didn't have time for nonsense. My daddy worked the line at the Ford plant for 37 years without missing a single day. Mama raised 6 kids on a shoestring budget, making miracles happen with hamburger and elbow macaroni. They taught me about respect, about hard work, and about standing up for yourself. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that last lesson. I'd let Bobby take and take until there was hardly anything left of me. Just a shell of a woman who jumped at shadows and apologized for breathing too loud. But standing there with that knife in my hand, I remembered who I was. Margaret Collins, daughter of John and Eleanor Mitchell, wife of Ralph Collins, who'd worked his fingers to the bone at the mill to give us a decent life. I wasn't just Bobby's mom. I was Maggie, and by God, I deserved better than this. "Put that down," Bobby said, trying to sound stern, but his voice wavered just enough for me to catch it. "You're being ridiculous." "Am I?" I asked, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. "Is it ridiculous to not want to be hit in my own kitchen? To expect my grown son to treat me with basic human decency? You know I didn't mean it," he tried, switching tactics. This was his pattern. Blow up, then act like nothing happened. Expect everything to go back to normal until the next explosion. "I just had a rough day at work and save it," I cut him off, the knife still firm in my grip. I've heard it all before, Bobby. Every excuse in the book. Your daddy had rough days too, you know. Plenty of 'em. Never once raised a hand to me or to you. The mention of his father made Bobby's face darken. Ralph had been gone for almost 15 years now, taken by a heart attack while shoveling snow from our driveway. Bobby had been 25 then, already showing signs of the man he'd become, but Ralph had kept him in line. My husband wasn't a perfect man by any stretch. He drank too much sometimes, especially after layoffs at the mill. But he never let Bobby talk back to me. "That's your mother," he'd say. "And in this house, we respect her." After Ralph died, it was like Bobby decided those rules didn't apply anymore. "Don't bring Dad into this," Bobby growled. "Why not? You think he'd be proud of you right now? You think he'd pat you on the back for slapping your mother because dinner was a minute late?" I could see the muscle in his jaw twitching, just like his daddy's used to when he was mad, but I wasn't backing down. Not this time. I thought about all those evenings sitting in front of our black and white TV, watching Ed Sullivan with little Bobby on my lap. How he'd beg to stay up late when Elvis was on. How we'd dance around this very kitchen to Jailhouse Rock, playing on the radio while I made his favorite chocolate chip cookies. Where had that little boy gone? "I work hard to put food on this table," he said, his voice low and dangerous. I nearly laughed out loud at that. "You work hard? Bobby, you've been unemployed for 3 months now. I'm the one still working at Henderson's Fabric, standing on my feet all day at 68 years old while you sit around watching Judge Judy and drinking beer. Don't you dare talk to me about working hard." His face flushed red at that. The truth has a way of doing that to people who've been living in lies for too long. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to get the upper hand again. "You know what, Mom? You've changed. You used to be a good mother." I'd heard this before, too. His way of twisting things around, making me the bad guy, making me doubt myself, but not tonight. "I'm still a good mother," I said quietly. "A good mother teaches her children right from wrong. And what you did was wrong, Bobby. Plain and simple." The old clock above the stove ticked away the seconds as we stared at each other. Outside, I could hear Mrs. Pearson next door calling for her cat, the familiar evening sounds of our little street on the east side of Cleveland. Cars passing by, kids being called in for dinner, screen doors slamming shut. Life going on as normal, while in my kitchen, everything had changed. "You wouldn't use that," Bobby finally said, nodding at the knife in my hand. His voice had that smug tone again, the one that made my skin crawl. "You don't have it in you." Maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't have it in me to hurt him. After all, I'd carried him inside me for 9 months, felt his first kicks, heard his first cries. But I had something else in me now, something that had been sleeping for far too long. Dignity, self-respect, and the kind of quiet rage that comes from years of being stepped on. "You want to bet?" I asked. And something in my voice must have convinced him I meant business, because he took another step back, bumping into the refrigerator behind him. I took a step forward, still holding that knife steady. The kitchen light glinted off the blade, sending little flashes across Bobby's face. His eyes darted from the knife to my face and back again, like he couldn't quite believe what was happening. That made 2 of us. I hardly recognized myself in that moment, but Lord knows it felt right. Like I was finally waking up after a long, deep sleep. "Now you listen here," I said, my voice low but clear as a bell. "I've spent my whole life taking care of you. When you had the chicken pox in 2nd grade, I sat up 3 nights straight, putting calamine lotion on every spot. When you needed braces, I worked double shifts at the factory to pay for 'em. When you wrecked your first car, I gave you mine and took the bus for 6 months. I could see the memories flickering across his face, but he stayed silent. Good. For once in his life, he was going to listen to me. "I've cooked for you, cleaned for you, and made excuses for you since the day you were born. And this is how you repay me? By treating me like I'm nothing but your personal maid? By hitting me in my own kitchen?" My voice broke a little on that last part, but I swallowed hard and kept going. The radio on the windowsill was playing softly. Some oldies station I always kept on. Funny how you notice little things in big moments. "Stand By Me" was playing, and wasn't that just the most ironic thing? I'd stood by Bobby through everything, and here we were. "You need to calm down," he said, trying to sound authoritative, but the effect was ruined by the way he kept eyeing that knife. "You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" I repeated, and this time I did laugh, though there wasn't a bit of humor in it. "Honey, I've been underreacting for about 15 years now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, take a moment to do it now, because just by clicking subscribe, you'll be entered in our $2,000 giveaway." Out the kitchen window, I could see the sun starting to set, casting long shadows across our little backyard. The swing set Ralph had built when Bobby was 5 was still there, rusting away. I'd asked Bobby to take it down years ago, but like most things I asked, it never got done. That swing set had seen better days, and honestly, so had I. "Put the knife down and we can talk about this rationally," Bobby said, his voice taking on that condescending tone he used when he thought I was being emotional, like my feelings were just some inconvenient woman thing he had to deal with. "We're done talking," I said. "I've been talking to you for years and you haven't heard a word I've said. So now you're going to listen." I took another step forward, not threatening exactly, but making it clear who was in control now. The linoleum floor creaked under my house slippers, the same blue ones Bobby had given me 3 Christmases ago when he couldn't be bothered to think of a real gift. "This is my house," I said. "Paid for with your daddy's life insurance and my 30 years at Henderson's Fabric. My name is on the deed. My sweat is in these walls, and I will not be disrespected under my own roof." Bobby's face changed then, like he was finally realizing this wasn't going to play out the way our arguments usually did. Usually, I'd get upset, he'd say something mean, I'd cry, he'd storm out, and then we'd pretend nothing happened the next day. Rinse and repeat for 15 years. "What do you want from me, Mom?" he asked, and for the first time in ages, he actually sounded uncertain. "An apology? Fine, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have hit you. Now, can we please just have dinner?" The casual way he said it, like he'd just stepped on my toe instead of slapping me across the face, made something inside me burn hotter. "An apology?" I shook my head. "Bobby, we're way past that now." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means things are going to change around here, starting tonight." He rolled his eyes at that, his momentary uncertainty fading back into the arrogance I'd come to know so well. "Come on, Mom. Put the knife away and let's eat. I'm starving." Always about him. Always about what he wanted, what he needed, what he demanded. Never a thought about me, about what I might be feeling or needing. "Do you remember Mrs. Abernathy who used to live across the street?" I asked, seemingly changing the subject. Bobby frowned, caught off guard. "The old lady with all the cats? What about her?" "She had a son, too. Big guy, always driving that motorcycle too fast up and down the street. He used to push her around just like you do with me." I watched his face carefully. One day she'd had enough. Nobody saw him for weeks. When people asked, she just said he'd gone to stay with relatives in Cincinnati. Bobby's eyes widened a fraction. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying nobody ever saw him again." I let that hang in the air for a moment. Funny thing is, Mrs. Abernathy seemed happier after that. Started going to bingo at the church, planted those pretty roses in her yard. "Are you threatening me?" Bobby asked, his voice caught between disbelief and anger. I just smiled. "I'm reminiscing is all, about a woman who finally found her peace." "You're crazy," he muttered, but there was a new wariness in his eyes. "Maybe I am," I agreed. "Maybe pushing someone for 15 years will do that to them." I could see him calculating, trying to figure out if he could get to the door before I could stop him. But I wasn't trying to keep him here. Quite the opposite, in fact. "Your daddy and I used to sit on the front porch every evening after dinner," I said, my voice softer now. "He'd have his pipe, and I'd bring out a glass of sweet tea. We'd watch you playing with the neighborhood kids until the streetlights came on. Those were good days, Bobby. Simple, but good." "What's your point?" he asked, impatient as always when I talked about the past. "My point is that I remember what happiness feels like. And this—" I gestured around the kitchen, at him, at the life we'd been living. "This isn't it." The microwave clock read 6:22 now. 22 minutes since he'd slapped me. 22 minutes that had changed everything. "So what now?" Bobby asked, crossing his arms over his chest like he did when he was feeling defensive. "Now," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You're going to pack a bag." That got his attention. His arms dropped to his sides, and he stared at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. "You're kicking me out? Over one little slap?" One little slap. Like it was nothing. Like all those years of verbal abuse were nothing. Like I was nothing. "No," I said. "Not just over one slap. Over 15 years of you treating me like I don't matter. Over 15 years of walking on eggshells in my own home. Over 15 years of watching my sweet little boy turn into a man I don't even recognize anymore." "Where am I supposed to go?" he demanded, as if this were still somehow my problem to solve. "That's not my concern," I said, and I meant it. For the first time in decades, I wasn't taking responsibility for Bobby's problems. "You're 40 years old. Figure it out." Bobby's face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen since he was a toddler, having a tantrum in the middle of Sears. His fists clenched at his sides, and for a second, I thought he might try to hit me again. My grip tightened on the knife, and something in my expression must have warned him off, because he took a half step back instead. "You can't be serious," he said, his voice a mix of anger and disbelief. "You'd throw your own son out on the street?" "You're not on the street," I corrected him. "You're in Cleveland, Ohio, with plenty of friends who've been letting you crash on their couches after your benders for years. Call one of them." The truth hit him like a bucket of cold water. He wasn't used to me standing my ground like this. Usually, I'd cave after a minute or two of his guilt trips. That's how it had been since Ralph died, Bobby pushing, me bending, over and over, until I was so twisted up I hardly recognized myself anymore. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, running a hand through his thinning hair, another trait he'd inherited from his daddy. "Where's my dinner? I'll eat, and we can talk about this when you've calmed down." I almost laughed at his audacity. Even now he expected me to serve him. To put that meatloaf on a plate with some mashed potatoes and green beans, just like I did every night. To sit across from him at the table and pretend everything was normal while my cheek still stung from his hand. "There's no dinner for you tonight," I said. "Not in this house." His eyes narrowed. "So what? You're going to starve me out now? Real motherly of you." That word, motherly, hit me like another slap. All these years, I'd tried to be the perfect mother. I'd sacrificed everything for him, and he'd used it against me, used my love as a weapon to control me. Well, not anymore. "A mother's job is to raise her children to be decent human beings," I said. "Somewhere along the way, I failed with you, but I'm done failing now. I'm done letting you treat me like this." Outside, the streetlights were flickering on, one by one down Maple Street. Mrs. Pearson's cat was meowing at our kitchen window, probably smelling the meatloaf I'd left warming in the oven. The normal sounds of our neighborhood continued while my world tilted on its axis. "You know what?" "Fine," Bobby spat. "I don't need this. I don't need you. I'll go stay with Dave." Dave was his drinking buddy from high school, another middle-aged man still living like he was 21. They'd spend weekends watching the Browns lose, drinking Budweiser, and complaining about how life had done them wrong. Dave's poor mother was probably still doing his laundry too. "That's a fine idea," I said, nodding like we were having a normal conversation. "You go pack your things, and I'll wrap up some of this meatloaf for you to take with you." The confusion on his face almost made me smile. He wasn't used to me agreeing with him so easily. "You're really doing this?" he asked, and for just a second, I caught a glimpse of the little boy who used to be afraid of thunderstorms, who used to crawl into my bed during those big Ohio storms that shook the windows and lit up the sky. "You're really kicking me out?" "Yes," I said simply. "I am." He stood there for a long moment, staring at me like he was trying to solve a complicated math problem. Then something in his face hardened. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice cold. "You're an old woman. Who's going to take care of you when you can't take care of yourself?" It was his final card to play, my fear of growing old alone, of ending up in one of those nursing homes where they park you in front of a TV and forget about you. He'd used that fear against me for years, reminding me that I needed him. But standing there in my kitchen with the knife in my hand and my cheek still stinging, I realized something important. "I'd rather be alone than be with someone who treats me like you do," I said. "Now go pack your things." For a moment, it looked like he might argue more, but then he turned and stomped down the hallway to his room. I could hear him yanking drawers open, slamming closet doors, muttering under his breath the whole time. I stayed in the kitchen, the knife still in my hand, listening to the sounds of my son preparing to leave my house for what I hoped would be the last time. While he packed, I carefully set the knife back in its block. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline starting to wear off, leaving me feeling both exhausted and strangely light, like I might float right up to the ceiling if I wasn't careful. I opened the oven and took out the meatloaf, still warm and smelling like comfort, like all the family dinners I'd made over the years. I sliced a thick piece, put it on a paper plate with some of the mashed potatoes I'd made that morning, and covered it with aluminum foil. By the time Bobby came back into the kitchen, dragging a duffel bag and with his old Browns jacket slung over his shoulder, I had the food waiting on the counter. "Here," I said, pushing the plate toward him. "I don't want you going hungry." He stared at the plate, then at me, like he was trying to figure out if this was some kind of trick. Finally, he grabbed it, tucking it awkwardly under his arm. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You'll call me tomorrow begging me to come back." I didn't bother responding to that. We both knew it wasn't true. Instead, I followed him to the front door, watching as he struggled with his bag, the plate of food, and his jacket. In the past, I would have rushed to help him, to make things easier for him. Not tonight. The porch light cast long shadows across our front yard as Bobby stepped outside. The night air was cool, with that special crispness that only comes in Ohio in the early fall. Down the street, the Johnsons were sitting on their porch swing, probably enjoying the evening like Ralph and I used to do. They waved, and I raised a hand in return, the most normal gesture in the world on the most extraordinary night of my life. I need to pause for a moment and ask you something important. Have you ever felt this way too? That crushing feeling when someone you love makes you feel invisible? Like your feelings don't matter? I see the pain in so many comments from people going through exactly what I'm describing. If this story has touched something in you, please leave a comment saying, "I deserve to be seen." Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today to know they're not alone, that someone else understands their silent struggle. I read every comment, and I promise you, sharing your truth helps heal not just yourself, but others walking this same difficult path. Now, let me tell you what happened next. Bobby turned at the bottom of the porch steps, looking back at me with a mixture of anger and disbelief still etched on his face. "This is really how you want to leave things?" he asked. "After everything I've done for you?" I almost laughed at that. After everything he had done for me? The sheer audacity of it would have knocked me sideways if I hadn't been holding on to the doorframe. "No, Bobby," I said quietly. "This is how you left things when you decided it was okay to hit your mother." He opened his mouth, probably to argue or make excuses or turn it all around on me like he always did. But I didn't give him the chance. For the first time in 15 years, I closed the door on my son. I turned the deadbolt with a decisive click and leaned my forehead against the cool wood for just a moment, letting the enormity of what I'd just done wash over me. Through the door, I could hear him swearing, kicking at the bottom step like he used to do as a teenager when he didn't get his way. Then the sound of his boots on the walkway, the creak of his truck door opening and slamming shut. The engine turned over once, twice, before roaring to life. Tires squealed as he backed out of the driveway too fast, another habit Ralph would have scolded him for. And then he was gone. Just like that, I stood there in the silence of my house, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The clock in the hallway ticked away the seconds, and somewhere outside a dog barked. But otherwise, it was quiet, the kind of quiet I hadn't experienced in years. Not just the absence of noise, but the absence of tension, of walking on eggshells, of waiting for the next explosion. Slowly, I made my way back to the kitchen. My legs felt wobbly, like I'd just run a marathon instead of standing my ground in my own home. I sank down onto one of the kitchen chairs, the same chair I'd sat in for countless dinners over the years, across from Bobby's empty seat. I touched my cheek where he'd hit me. It was still tender, and I knew it would probably bruise. What would I tell the ladies at church? What would I say to Dot and Marge when they asked about Bobby at our weekly pinochle game? The truth, I decided. For once, I'd tell the truth. I looked at the knife block where I'd returned the carving knife. I'd never actually intended to use it on Bobby. Not really. But when my fingers had closed around that handle, something had shifted inside me. Some last thread of fear had snapped, and in its place grew a kind of strength I hadn't felt in years. I'd threatened him with stories about Mrs. Abernathy, let him think I might be capable of violence. The truth was much simpler. I was just tired. Bone-deep tired of being afraid in my own home. My eyes fell on the framed photo on the windowsill. Bobby at his high school graduation, grinning in his cap and gown, his arm around my shoulders. Ralph standing proud behind us both. Where had that boy gone? When had he turned into the angry man who just stormed out of my house? It hadn't happened overnight. That's the thing about these situations. They creep up on you so gradually you don't even notice until you're in too deep. After Ralph died, Bobby started staying out late, coming home smelling like beer and cigarettes. I'd been so caught up in my own grief that I'd let it slide. Then he lost his job at the factory, the same factory where Ralph had worked all those years. Said his boss had it out for him, but I'd heard rumors about him showing up late, taking extra long breaks. He moved back home temporarily while he looked for another job. That was 12 years ago. The temporary arrangement became permanent, and somewhere along the way, the power dynamic had shifted. This had become his house, with his rules, and I was just the woman who cooked and cleaned and kept quiet when he was in one of his moods. Until tonight. I got up from the table, my joints protesting after the tension of the last hour. The meatloaf was still sitting on the counter where I'd left it after giving Bobby his portion. My own dinner. I wasn't hungry anymore, but I cut myself a slice anyway and sat back down. I needed to do something normal, something every day, to anchor myself in this new reality. The food tasted like nothing in my mouth. I chewed mechanically, washing it down with tap water from the glass Bobby had left on the table earlier. His water glass, which I would have normally rushed to refill if it got too low. Little things. So many little things that added up to a life of servitude. What would I do now? The question hit me suddenly, making me set down my fork. For 15 years, my life had revolved around Bobby's needs and moods. Now he was gone, and the house stretched around me, empty and full of possibilities all at once. I could redecorate. The thought came out of nowhere, surprising a small laugh out of me. I could paint the living room that soft sage green I'd seen in Better Homes and Gardens at the dentist's office. Bobby had vetoed it, saying green was for old ladies' houses. Well, I was an old lady, wasn't I? And this was my house. Or I could join that senior's bus trip to Niagara Falls that the community center had been advertising. 3 days and 2 nights with a stop at the Buffalo Art Museum. Bobby had scoffed when I'd mentioned it, said it was a waste of money. Maybe I'd get a cat. Bobby was allergic. Or at least that's what he claimed whenever I brought up the idea of getting some company around the house. A nice orange tabby like my Aunt Lillian used to have. The possibilities stretched out before me like an open road, thrilling and terrifying all at once. For the first time in years, the only person I had to please was myself. The only schedule I had to keep was my own. The only temper I had to worry about was the sound of tires on gravel cut through my thoughts, a car pulling into my driveway. My heart leapt into my throat. Had Bobby come back? What would I do if he had? The knife block seemed very far away suddenly. Headlights swept across the kitchen window, then cut out. A car door slammed, but it wasn't the familiar sound of Bobby's truck door. This was lighter, less angry. Then a knock at the front door, not Bobby's impatient pounding, but a gentle, almost tentative rap. On shaking legs, I made my way to the door. Through the peephole, I could see Mrs. Pearson from next door, her gray hair in its usual neat bun, concern written across her face. I opened the door, suddenly conscious of my rumpled appearance and the bruise probably forming on my cheek. "Maggie?" she said, her eyes immediately going to my face. "Are you all right? I saw Bobby tear out of here like a bat out of hell. Looked like he was about to run over Mr. Johnston's mailbox again." I hesitated for just a moment. It would be so easy to make an excuse, To say we'd had a little disagreement, but everything was fine. To keep pretending, like I had for years. But I was done pretending. "No, Helen, I'm not all right," I said honestly. "But I think I'm going to be." Her eyes softened with understanding. She'd been widowed even longer than I had, and I'd sometimes envied the peaceful way she lived alone with her cat and her gardening. No adult children moving back in. No walking on eggshells. "Why don't you come over for a cup of tea?" she suggested gently. "Or I can come in if you'd rather not be alone right now." The kindness in her voice almost undid me. After years of Bobby's harsh demands, simple kindness felt like a cool drink on a hot day. "Tea sounds wonderful," I said, surprising myself. Normally I wouldn't leave the house at this hour. Bobby might need something, after all. But Bobby wasn't here. And he wouldn't be coming back. Not if I could help it. I grabbed my cardigan from the hook by the door and stepped out into the cool evening air. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, and somewhere down the street I could hear children laughing as they squeezed in the last few minutes of play before bedtime. Just an ordinary evening on Maple Street. But for me, it was the first evening of my new life. As I walked down my porch steps, I realized I was still holding the knife. Not the big carving knife I'd threatened Bobby with, but a small butter knife from the dinner table. I must have picked it up without thinking when I heard the car in the driveway. I looked at it glinting in the porch light, this small, ordinary utensil that suddenly seemed to represent everything. My fear, my instinct to protect myself, my readiness to never be a victim again. "Maggie?" Helen was watching me with concern. I smiled and slipped the knife into my cardigan pocket. "Just a second, Helen. Let me lock up." As I turned my key in the deadbolt, I made a silent promise to myself. No one would ever make me feel unsafe in my own home again. No one would ever raise a hand to me without consequences. I'd spent 68 years being a good girl, a good wife, a good mother. Now it was time to be good to myself. Helen Pearson's kitchen couldn't have been more different from mine, though our houses were built identical back in the 50s. Where my kitchen still had the same faded yellow wallpaper and worn linoleum from 20 years ago, Helen's was painted a cheerful blue with white curtains that looked fresh as spring. She had little ceramic chickens lined up on the windowsill and a cross-stitch sampler that read, "Bless this mess," hanging by the refrigerator. It was cozy in a way my kitchen hadn't felt in years. "Sit, sit," she said, gesturing to a chair at her round oak table while she filled her electric kettle. "You look like you've been through the ringer, Maggie." I sank into the chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. My body felt like I'd aged another 10 years in the span of an hour. "It's been a night, that's for sure," I said, my voice sounding far away even to my own ears. Helen placed a box of Lipton tea bags on the table between us, along with a sugar bowl and a little pitcher of milk. Such simple kindnesses, but they nearly brought tears to my eyes. When was the last time someone had served me instead of the other way around? "You want to tell me about it?" she asked, not pushing, just offering an ear if I needed one. The kettle whistled, and she poured hot water into 2 mugs with pictures of cardinals on them. The familiar smell of black tea filled the kitchen, comforting as an old quilt. "Bobby hit me," I said simply, the words falling from my mouth before I could think better of it. "He slapped me across the face because dinner was late." Helen's hand froze in the act of passing me a mug. Her eyes widened, then narrowed as they took in the mark on my cheek that I knew must be turning purple by now. "That no-good son of a—" She caught herself, remembering she was talking about my son. "I'm sorry, Maggie. That's just— There's no excuse for that. None whatsoever." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, letting its heat seep into my cold fingers. "No, there isn't," I agreed. "That's what I finally realized tonight. After 15 years of making excuses for him, I finally ran out." 15 years? Helen looked shocked. Has this happened before? The hitting? No, but the rest of it? The yelling, the controlling, the making me feel worthless? That's been going on since Ralph died. I took a sip of tea, the hot liquid burning a path down my throat. Tonight was just the final straw. Helen reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was spotted with age, just like mine, but her grip was strong. So that's why he tore out of here like his tail was on fire. You stood up to him? A small smile tugged at my lips. I did more than that. I kicked him out. Good for you, Helen exclaimed, then seemed to catch herself. I mean, I'm sorry it came to that, but Maggie, it's about time. We've all been worried about you, you know. You have? This surprised me. I'd thought I'd hidden the situation pretty well from the neighbors, from the ladies at church. I was ashamed, I realized. Ashamed that I couldn't control my own son, that I'd let things get so bad. Of course we have. The way he talks to you, the way he comes and goes at all hours, expecting you to wait on him hand and foot. Helen shook her head. It's not right, Maggie. You deserve better. Those 3 words, you deserve better, hit me like a revelation. Did I? After a lifetime of putting others first, of making do, of accepting less than I gave, did I actually deserve more? The thought was almost too big to hold on to. I threatened him with a knife, I confessed, the words rushing out now. My good carving knife. I didn't actually try to hurt him, but I let him think I might. I told him about Mrs. Abernathy and her son who disappeared. Helen's eyebrows shot up. Mildred Abernathy from across the street? The one who moved to Florida back in '98? I nodded. I may have implied that she did something to her son, that he didn't just go to Cincinnati like she told everyone. A beat of silence, and then Helen burst out laughing. It was so unexpected that after a moment I found myself joining in, the laughter bubbling up from some place deep inside that hadn't seen the light of day in years. Oh, Maggie, Helen wheezed when she could speak again. Mildred's son Gary is alive and well in Cincinnati. He sends her pictures of his kids every Christmas. I get her holiday newsletter. I know that, I said, wiping tears of laughter from my eyes. But Bobby doesn't. And the look on his face. This set us off again, 2 old women cackling like teenagers over mugs of tea. When the laughter finally died down, I felt different. Lighter somehow, like I'd set down a heavy bag I'd been carrying for miles. I don't know what comes next, Helen, I admitted. I've been Bobby's mother for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to just be Maggie. Helen nodded thoughtfully, stirring another spoonful of sugar into her tea. I felt the same way after Harold passed. For 43 years, I was Harold's wife. Then suddenly I wasn't anymore, and I had to figure out who Helen was on her own. How did you do it? I asked. She smiled, gesturing around her bright kitchen. One small change at a time. I painted the kitchen blue because Harold always insisted on yellow. I got muffin because Harold was allergic to cats. I joined the garden club and learned to play canasta. She leaned forward. You know what, Maggie? Turns out I like Helen quite a lot. And I think you'll find you like Maggie, too. I let her words sink in, imagining a life built around my own preferences for a change. What color would I paint my kitchen if it were truly mine? What hobby would I take up if I didn't have to worry about Bobby's approval? I'm afraid, I admitted softly. Not of Bobby. Well, maybe a little. But mostly I'm afraid of being alone, of failing at this new life. You won't be alone, Helen said firmly. You've got me right next door. You've got the ladies from church. Heck, Dot Baker would adopt you in a heartbeat if you let her. She's been trying to get you to join her water aerobics class at the Y for years. I had to smile at that. Dot was 72 and had more energy than women half her age. She'd been after me to join her at the YMCA since Ralph died, but Bobby always had some reason why I couldn't go. He needed dinner at a certain time. He needed me to be home to sign for a package. Always something. I'm already continuing my story, but let me remind you, if you haven't subscribed yet, take a moment to do so. Just by subscribing, you'll be automatically entered in our $2,000 giveaway as soon as we reach 1,000 subscribers. It takes just one click. What if he comes back? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. What if he shows up drunk in the middle of the night, banging on the door and demanding to be let in? Helen's face turned serious. Then you call the police, Maggie, and you call me. My Harold might be gone, but he left behind his Louisville Slugger, and I'm not afraid to use it. The image of tiny Helen Pearson confronting Bobby with a baseball bat was both terrifying and oddly comforting. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Thank you, for the tea and for everything, she squeezed back. That's what neighbors are for. Now, tell me what you're going to do first with your new freedom. Every journey starts with a single step, as they say. I thought about it for a moment. I think I'm going to move my bedroom. Your bedroom? Helen looked confused. I nodded. I've been sleeping in the small bedroom since Ralph died. Let Bobby have the master because he needed the space. But tonight, I'm moving back into the big bedroom. My bedroom, with the view of the maple tree in the backyard. Helen beamed at me like I'd just announced I was climbing Mount Everest. That's perfect, Maggie. Absolutely perfect. By the time I walked back to my house an hour later, the street was quiet. Porch lights cast pools of warm yellow light on neatly trimmed lawns. Behind curtained windows, families were settling in for the night, watching TV or reading or getting children ready for bed. Normal lives in normal houses, and now, perhaps, I could have that too. I paused at the bottom of my porch steps, looking up at the house Ralph and I had bought as newlyweds. It had seen so much: birthdays and Christmases, arguments and reconciliations, Bobby's first steps, and Ralph's final days. Tonight, it would witness another first. Margaret Collins reclaiming her life. The house was silent when I stepped inside, but it didn't feel empty. It felt expectant, like it was waiting to see what I would do next. I locked the door behind me, deadbolt and chain, something I'd never bothered with when it was just Bobby and me. But things were different now. I was different. I walked through the living room, turning on lamps as I went, pushing back the darkness. In the kitchen, I cleaned up my half-eaten dinner, wrapping the leftover meatloaf for tomorrow. Bobby's dirty coffee mug from that morning still sat on the counter where he'd left it for me to wash. I picked it up, considered it for a moment, then walked to the trash can and dropped it in with a satisfying thunk. Small acts of rebellion. Then I climbed the stairs to the bedrooms, pausing at the top to catch my breath. These old knees weren't what they used to be. Bobby's room was at the end of the hall, the door ajar. I pushed it open and looked inside at the unmade bed, clothes scattered across the floor, empty beer cans on the nightstand. A grown man's room that looked like it belonged to a teenager. I closed the door on the mess. I'd deal with it tomorrow. The master bedroom door creaked when I pushed it open, like it was protesting the intrusion after all these years. The room was exactly as I'd left it when I moved into the smaller bedroom after Ralph died. His dresser still stood against the far wall, the collection of pocket knives he'd been so proud of gathering dust on top. The queen-sized bed was stripped down to the mattress, but otherwise untouched. Even the dent in his pillow seemed to have held its shape, though I knew that was just my imagination playing tricks. I flipped the light switch, and the overhead fixture cast a warm glow across the faded blue wallpaper with its pattern of tiny sailboats. Ralph had hated that wallpaper, said it made him seasick if he stared at it too long. I'd always promised we'd change it someday, but someday never came. Now, looking at it in the soft light, I found I didn't mind it so much. Maybe I'd keep it after all. A reminder that this room, this house, was mine now, to change or keep as I saw fit. It took me 3 trips to move my clothes from the small bedroom down the hall. My joints protested with each journey, but I ignored them. This was too important to put off until tomorrow. On the 4th trip, I carried my bedding. The quilt my mother had made for my wedding, the pillows I'd bought on sale at JCPenney last winter. I made up the bed slowly, smoothing each layer with care, like I was preparing an altar. When the bed was made, I sat on the edge of it, feeling the familiar creak of springs that had once held the weight of my husband and me through 4 decades of marriage. The mattress needed replacing. It sagged in the middle like a tired hammock. But that could wait. Tonight, it was enough to be back in this room. My room. From here, I could see out the back window to the old maple tree Ralph had strung with lights every Christmas until his knees got too bad for climbing. Beyond that, the lights of other houses on the next street over winked like earthbound stars. I'd forgotten how peaceful this view was, especially at night. On the nightstand, a fine layer of dust covered the framed photo of Ralph and me on our 30th anniversary. We were standing in front of Niagara Falls, my hair whipping in the mist, both of us squinting into the sun but smiling so wide our faces might crack. It was the last big trip we took before he got sick. I picked up the photo and wiped the dust away with the edge of my cardigan. "Well, Ralph," I said to his smiling face, "I've gone and done it now, kicked our boy out." I paused, almost expecting an answer from those frozen features. "Don't look at me like that. You know he had it coming." In my mind, I could almost hear Ralph's deep chuckle. He wouldn't have put up with Bobby's behavior for a minute. He'd have had that boy straightened out the first time he raised his voice to me. But Ralph wasn't here, and I'd had to find my own strength. Better late than never, I supposed. I set the photo back on the nightstand and got to my feet with a groan. One last task before I could call it a night. From the small bedroom that had been mine, I retrieved the worn leather Bible that had sat on my nightstand for as long as I could remember. It had been my mother's, and her mother's before her. The pages were soft with use, the margins filled with notes in different hands spanning 3 generations. Back in the master bedroom, I placed the Bible on what had once been Ralph's nightstand, a claiming of territory of sorts. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it to the Psalms, the way I did every night before sleep. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" I read aloud, the familiar words washing over me like a balm. "The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Of whom shall I be afraid?" The question lingered in the quiet room. I'd been afraid for so long. Afraid of Bobby's temper, afraid of being alone, afraid of what the neighbors might think. But tonight, something had changed. The fear wasn't gone completely. I doubted it ever would be, but it had been joined by something else, something that felt a lot like hope. I closed the Bible and set it aside, then slowly went through my nighttime routine, washing my face in the adjoining bathroom, my bathroom now, brushing my teeth, changing into the flannel nightgown I'd had for more winters than I could count. Each familiar action took on new meaning in this reclaimed space. As I climbed into bed and pulled the quilt up to my chin, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. Pride, for standing up for myself at last. Grief, for the son I'd lost long before tonight's confrontation. Fear, for the uncertain days ahead. And underneath it all, a quiet, persistent joy. For the first time in 15 years, I could breathe freely in my own home. Sleep came quickly, pulling me under like a strong current. I dreamed of Ralph, young again and strong, dancing with me in the kitchen to Elvis on the radio. I dreamed of Bobby as a little boy, gap-toothed and freckled, bringing me dandelions clutched in his grubby fist. And I dreamed of myself, not young, but standing straight and tall, my face turned toward a sun I couldn't quite see but could feel warming my skin. The sound of breaking glass tore me from sleep. For a disoriented moment, I couldn't remember where I was, why the shadows fell differently across the ceiling than I was used to. Then it all came rushing back, the slap, the knife, Bobby leaving, me moving back into the master bedroom. Another crash, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the floor downstairs. Bobby. He'd come back. My heart hammered against my ribs as I fumbled for the bedside lamp. The clock on the nightstand read 2:17 a.m. I'd been asleep for barely 3 hours. Outside, rain had started to fall, pattering against the window in a rhythm that would normally have lulled me deeper into sleep. Not tonight. "Mom!" Bobby's voice bellowed from downstairs, slurred and angry. "I know you're in there. Open the damn door." So he hadn't broken in yet. The noises I'd heard must have been him throwing something at the house, maybe breaking a window. My hands shook as I reached for the phone on the nightstand. But then I hesitated. Who would I call? The police? Could I really do that to my own son? "I'm counting to 10, and then I'm coming in whether you like it or not." His words were punctuated by a loud thud, his fist against the front door, or maybe his foot. 1, 2. I slid out of bed, my old knees protesting the sudden movement. The hardwood floor was cold beneath my bare feet as I made my way to the bedroom door and locked it, a flimsy defense, but better than nothing. Then I picked up the phone and dialed with trembling fingers. "Hello?" Helen Pearson's voice was thick with sleep, but alert enough. "Helen, it's Maggie," I whispered, though I knew Bobby couldn't hear me through the floor and the closed door. "He's back. Bobby's outside trying to break in." "I'll be right there," Helen said without hesitation. "I'm calling the police too." "No, don't." I started to protest, but she'd already hung up. Downstairs, the counting had stopped, replaced by the sound of glass definitely breaking. The living room window, I guessed, the big one that faced the street. Bobby had found a way in. I looked around the bedroom frantically, searching for something, anything, I could use to defend myself. My eyes fell on Ralph's old Louisville slugger, leaning in the corner where it had stood since his last softball game with the Methodist church team. I'd kept meaning to move it to the attic, but like so many things, I never got around to it. I picked up the bat, surprised by its weight and the unfamiliar feel of it in my hands. I'd never been much for sports. That was Ralph's department. But the smooth wood felt reassuring as I gripped it, moving to stand behind the bedroom door. Heavy footsteps stumbled up the stairs, accompanied by muttered curses. Bobby was drunk, drunker than I'd heard him in a long time. The kind of drunk that made him mean even on his good days. "Mom! Where the hell are you? This isn't funny anymore." His voice was closer now, just outside in the hallway. I held my breath. The bat clutched so tight my knuckles ached. The doorknob rattled as he tried it, then rattled harder when he found it locked. "Open this door right now," he demanded, pounding on the wood hard enough to make it shudder in its frame. "This is my house too." "Go away, Bobby," I called, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "You're drunk and you're not welcome here anymore." "Not welcome?" He laughed, an ugly sound that sent chills down my spine. "That's a good one, Mom. Real good. Now open this door before I break it down." I believed him. The door was old, the lock simple. It wouldn't stand up to a determined assault, but I wasn't going to open it. Not this time. "I've called the police," I lied, hoping to scare him off. "They'll be here any minute, and the neighbors have already heard you breaking in. They're watching." This gave him pause. For a long moment, the only sound was his heavy breathing on the other side of the door. Then he rattled the doorknob again, harder this time. "You're bluffing," he said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "You wouldn't call the cops on your own son." I thought about that. Would I? A week ago, the answer would have been no. I would have opened the door, let him in, endured whatever verbal abuse he felt like dishing out. I would have made excuses, to myself, to him, to anyone who asked, but that was before he hit me, before I'd remembered who I was. "Try me," I said, and I meant it. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. I could almost hear the wheels turning in Bobby's alcohol-soaked brain, weighing his options. The old me would have given in by now, opened the door with apologies tumbling from my lips. But that Maggie was gone, replaced by a woman who'd finally remembered her own worth. "This isn't over," Bobby finally growled, his voice thick with threat. "You can't keep me out of my own house." "Watch me," I replied, the words coming from some deep well of courage I hadn't known I possessed. His response was a kick to the door that made the whole frame shudder. I jumped back, the bat raised instinctively. Another kick, and I could see the wood beginning to splinter around the lock. One more good hit and he'd be through. And then, from outside, came the sound of sirens. Distant at first, then growing rapidly louder. Blue and red lights began to flash through the bedroom window, painting the walls with urgent color. Bobby must have seen them too, because I heard him swear, followed by the thundering of footsteps as he ran back down the stairs. I stayed frozen in place, the bat still clutched in my white-knuckled hands, listening to the commotion below. The front door opened, Bobby trying to escape, I guessed. And then came voices, authoritative voices ordering someone to stop, to put their hands where they could be seen. Bobby's voice, slurred but belligerent, demanding to know what the hell was going on. And then another voice, high and clear, Helen Pearson, telling the officers that this was her neighbor's house, that her neighbor's son was trying to break in after being told to leave. Good old Helen. She'd actually called the police, just like she promised. A gentle knock at the bedroom door made me jump. "Mrs. Collins, this is Officer Ramirez with the Cleveland Police. Are you all right in there?" I lowered the bat slowly, my arms aching from holding it for so long. "Yes," I called, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "I'm all right. Just a minute." My hands trembled as I unlocked the door and opened it to find a young police officer standing there, her face serious but kind. Behind her, I could see 2 more officers escorting a handcuffed Bobby down the stairs, his protests echoing through the house. "Ma'am, your son is being detained for breaking and entering," Officer Ramirez explained. "Your neighbor says you asked him to leave earlier and he returned without permission. Is that correct?" I nodded, suddenly feeling very small and very old in my flannel nightgown with my gray hair wild around my face. "That's right. I told him he couldn't live here anymore." The officer's eyes fell to the bat in my hand, then to my cheek, where I knew the bruise from earlier was now fully formed. Her expression softened. "Did he do that to your face, Mrs. Collins?" I hesitated only briefly before nodding again. "Yes, that's why I asked him to leave. He hit me because dinner was late." Something flashed in Officer Ramirez's eyes. Anger, maybe, or determination. "Would you like to press charges, ma'am? For both the breaking and entering and the assault?" Press charges. Against my own son. The thought should have been unthinkable. But standing there in the doorway of the bedroom I'd reclaimed, I found it wasn't. Bobby had made his choices. Now it was time to make mine. "Yes," I said, the word falling from my lips like a stone. "Yes, I would." Officer Ramirez nodded, professional, but with a hint of approval in her eyes. "I'll need to take your statement, and we'll need photographs of your injuries for evidence. Can you come downstairs with me? There's an ambulance outside if you need medical attention." "I don't need an ambulance," I assured her, setting the bat down against the wall. "Just let me put on my robe." Downstairs, the living room was a mess. The front window was indeed broken. Glass scattered across the carpet where Bobby had apparently thrown a rock through it to get in. One of the side tables was overturned, and the lamp that had sat on it lay broken on the floor. But the damage wasn't as bad as it could have been. Bobby hadn't had time to do his worst before the police arrived. Helen Pearson was sitting on my couch, still in her bathrobe with curlers in her hair, looking for all the world like she dealt with middle-of-the-night break-ins every day. When she saw me, she jumped up and hurried over. "Maggie, thank the Lord you're all right. When I heard the glass breaking, I was so worried." She pulled me into a fierce hug, the kind that makes you feel like everything might actually be okay after all. "Thank you for calling the police," I said when she released me. "I couldn't bring myself to do it." Helen waved a dismissive hand. "Of course I called them. That's what friends do. Besides, nobody gets to terrorize my best pinochle partner and get away with it." Despite everything, I found myself smiling. Best pinochle partner. I hadn't known she thought of me that way. Through the broken window, I could see Bobby sitting in the back of a police car, his head down. For a moment, my heart twisted with the old familiar pain. That was my son out there, my little boy, the child I'd carried beneath my heart for 9 months, whose first steps I'd witnessed, whose tears I'd dried. How had we come to this? But then I remembered the sting of his hand across my face, the years of verbal abuse, the slow erosion of my sense of self. I remembered the knife in my hand and the moment I'd finally said, "Enough. Some bonds once broken can't be mended, at least not without significant change on both sides." And I wasn't sure Bobby was capable of that change or even interested in making it. The next few hours passed in a blur of forms and statements. Officer Ramirez took photographs of my bruised cheek and the damage to the house. Another officer measured and documented the broken window. They asked questions, and I answered as honestly as I could, my voice growing stronger with each telling of the story. "He'll be held until arraignment," Officer Ramirez explained as they prepared to leave. "That's usually within 48 hours. The judge will determine bail, but with the evidence of assault and the breaking and entering, plus your statement that you fear for your safety, there's a good chance they'll issue a restraining order." A restraining order. Against my son. The thought was surreal, like something from one of those television shows Bobby liked to watch, where everyone's problems got wrapped up neatly before the credits rolled. Real life was messier, the edges ragged and raw. "What happens after that?" I asked. Officer Ramirez's expression was compassionate, but direct. "That depends partly on you, Mrs. Collins. If you maintain the charges, there will be a trial. Your son could face jail time, especially if he has prior offenses. I thought of the DUI Bobby had gotten 2 years ago, the bar fight that had resulted in a night in jail, but no formal charges. Small things that I'd dismissed as boys will be boys, even though Bobby was well into middle age. I understand, I said, though I wasn't sure I did, not fully. The implications of what I was doing were still sinking in, like water into parched earth. Thank you for coming so quickly. By the time the police left, the sky outside was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Helen had made coffee in my kitchen, strong and black, the way we both liked it, and we sat at the table, two old women in bathrobes watching the sunrise through the window. What now? Helen asked, wrapping her gnarled hands around her mug for warmth. I shrugged, too tired to think beyond the next hour. I guess I need to get that window fixed and change the locks. I meant bigger picture, Helen clarified. With Bobby, the question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. What would I do about my son? Would I maintain the charges, see him prosecuted? Would I ever let him come back home? Could we ever repair what had been broken between us? I don't know, I admitted finally. I just know I can't go back to the way things were. Helen reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You don't have to figure it all out today, Maggie. One step at a time, remember? One step at a time. Like moving back into the master bedroom, like picking up that knife in the first place. Small actions that added up to a life reclaimed. The hardware store opens at 9, I said, making a decision. I'm going to get new locks, and maybe some paint for the kitchen. Helen smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. What color? I thought about it for a moment. Blue, like yours, but maybe a shade darker. Blue it is, Helen agreed. And I've got a cat carrier you can borrow for when you're ready to pick out that orange tabby you mentioned. I felt a smile tug at the corners of my mouth, the first genuine one in longer than I could remember. One step at a time, Helen. Locks first, then paint, then maybe a cat. As the sun rose fully over Maple Street, casting long golden rays across my battered living room, I felt something rising within me too. Not happiness exactly. It was too soon for that. But something adjacent to it, something like possibility. Bobby was gone, at least for now. The house was quiet, the air somehow lighter without the weight of his anger filling every corner. For the first time in 15 years, I could breathe fully, move freely, exist completely as myself rather than as an extension of someone else's needs and moods. It wasn't how I'd imagined my golden years would be. Alone in a house with a broken window and a restraining order against my only child. But as I sat there with Helen, planning trips to the hardware store and discussing cat names, I realized something important. It wasn't too late to start again. At 68 years old, Margaret Collins was finally ready to live her own life. And that, I decided, as I sipped my coffee and watched the morning light transform my familiar kitchen, was worth celebrating. The hardware store on Mayfield Road hadn't changed much in the 30-odd years I'd been shopping there. Same faded green awning out front, same bell that jingled when you pushed open the door, same smell of sawdust and metal and those pine-scented air fresheners they hung near the register. Even Mr. Kowalski, the owner, looked exactly the same. Maybe a few more wrinkles around his eyes, his mustache a little whiter, but still wearing the same worn leather apron over his flannel shirt. Mrs. Collins, he greeted me as I walked in, the bell announcing my arrival. Haven't seen you in here for a while. How's that screen door holding up? The one Ralph and I fixed back in must have been '05 or '06. Still good as new, Ed, I assured him, touched that he remembered. That was the thing about small neighborhood businesses. They knew you, knew your history. The big box stores out by the highway might have lower prices, but they didn't remember your husband or ask after your screen door. What can I help you with today? He asked, coming around from behind the counter. His eyes flickered briefly to the bruise on my cheek, but he was too polite to mention it. I need new locks, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. For all the doors, and maybe a security chain for the front. Something in Ed's expression shifted. Understanding, maybe, or concern. He'd known Ralph, known our family for decades. He must have heard stories about Bobby over the years, seen the changes in me after Ralph died. Small communities have long memories and sharp eyes. Had some trouble? He asked gently. I hesitated, then decided on honesty. Bobby broke a window last night. The police took him away. Ed nodded, no judgment in his weathered face. I'm sorry to hear that, Maggie, but good for you for changing those locks. Should have done it years ago, if you don't mind my saying. I didn't mind. He was right, after all. Let's get you set up with something secure, he continued, leading me down an aisle lined with various locks and door hardware. I recommend these deadbolts for the front and back. They're solid as they come. And for the security chain, this one here is reinforced steel. Won't break easy, I can tell you that. By the time I left the hardware store, I had spent more money than I'd initially planned. But I had everything I needed. New deadbolts for both doors, a security chain, a peephole for the front door, and even window locks for every window on the first floor. Ed had thrown in a can of WD-40 for free. Those new locks will turn smoother with a little lubricant, and promised to send his nephew over that afternoon to install everything. He's good with his hands, my sister's boy, Ed assured me. Does all my home repairs, and he'll give you the family discount. Family discount. The phrase lingered in my mind as I drove back home, the hardware store bags rattling in the passenger seat. Family was supposed to be your safety net, your soft place to fall. When had my family, or what was left of it, become the thing I needed protection from? Helen was waiting on my porch when I pulled into the driveway, a casserole dish in her hands and a determined look on her face. She'd changed out of her bathrobe into a flowered house dress, her silver hair neatly combed, but she still had the air of a woman on a mission. "Hope you don't mind, but I've rallied the troops," she said as I climbed out of the car. "Dot's bringing lunch, Marge is bringing her toolkit to help with temporary repairs on that window, and Pastor Jim's wife is organizing a prayer circle." "A prayer circle?" I repeated, not sure whether to be touched or mortified. "Helen, I don't need the whole neighborhood knowing my business." Helen fixed me with a look that brooked no argument. "Too late for that, Maggie. Bobby made sure the whole street knew your business when he came hollering at 2 a.m. Besides, this is Cleveland. We take care of our own." I couldn't argue with that. This neighborhood had seen its share of hard times over the decades. Factory closings, foreclosures, families struggling to make ends meet. But through it all, there had been this sense of solidarity. When the Petersons lost their house to fire in '98, the neighborhood had rallied with donations and help. When old Mr. Jenkins' wife died, the ladies from church had made sure he had a hot meal every day for months. Now it was my turn to be on the receiving end of that community support, and as uncomfortable as it made me, I knew better than to refuse. "Fine," I conceded, "but tell Pastor Jim's wife to keep the prayers general. I don't need everyone at First Baptist discussing my family drama on Sunday." "Already taken care of," Helen assured me, following me up the porch steps. "As far as anyone knows, you had a break-in. The details are nobody's business." Inside, the living room looked even worse in the harsh light of day. Shards of glass still glittered on the carpet, despite my best efforts to clean up before heading to the hardware store. The overturned side table had left a dent in the wall, and there was a scuff mark on the baseboard where Bobby had kicked it in his rage. "My word," Helen muttered, surveying the damage. "That boy did a number on this place." "It's just things," I said, though my heart ached at the sight of the broken lamp, a wedding gift from Ralph's mother, irreplaceable now. "They can be fixed or replaced." Helen set her casserole dish on the coffee table and put her hands on her hips. "Well, let's get started then. No sense standing around feeling sorry about it. You got trash bags? We need to get that glass cleaned up before someone cuts themselves." By noon, the cavalry had indeed arrived. Dot Baker showed up with enough food to feed an army, her famous chicken and dumplings, a garden salad, and an apple pie still warm from the oven. Marge Wilson brought not only her toolkit, but also a roll of heavy plastic and duct tape to cover the broken window until it could be properly replaced. "Frank's cousin works at the glass place over on Cedar," she explained as she measured the window frame. "I'll give him a call, see if he can't get you a good price on a replacement. They should be able to come out Monday or Tuesday at the latest." I watched in amazement as these women, all in their 60s and 70s, took over my living room with the efficiency of a military operation. Dot swept up the last of the glass while Helen rearranged the furniture to hide the dent in the wall. Marge, balanced on a stepladder that I wouldn't have trusted with my weight, secured the plastic over the window frame with practiced movements. "There," she said, climbing down and admiring her handiwork. "That'll hold until the glass company can get here. It's not pretty, but it'll keep the weather out." "And wandering suns," Dot added under her breath. though not quite quietly enough. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. They knew. Of course they knew. In a neighborhood like this, with houses close together and windows often open in the summer, not much stayed secret for long. "It's all right," I said, breaking the silence. "You might as well know the truth. Bobby's the one who did this. He came back after I kicked him out earlier." The three women exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Then Dot stepped forward and pulled me into a hug that smelled of flower and lavender water. "We know, honey," she said softly. "We've all been worried about you for years, but you're doing the right thing now, and we're here for you." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, tears I'd been holding back since last night, since the moment Bobby's hand had connected with my cheek. I'd been so afraid for so long, afraid of being alone, afraid of what people would think. But here were these women, my friends and neighbors for decades, offering nothing but support and understanding. "I don't know what comes next," I admitted, echoing what I'd told Helen earlier. Marge patted my shoulder with her work-roughened hand. "None of us ever do, dear. We just take it one day at a time and trust the good Lord to guide our steps." Dot nodded agreement. "And in the meantime, we eat. I didn't make this apple pie to look at it, you know." We moved to the kitchen, where the scent of Bobby's rage didn't linger quite so heavily. Around my worn formica table, with mismatched chairs pulled close, we ate Dot's chicken and dumplings and talked about everything and nothing. The weather, Pastor Jim's new sermon series, Marge's granddaughter's college plans. Normal, everyday topics that grounded me in this new reality I was creating. After lunch, as Dot was cutting generous slices of pie, a knock at the door made me freeze. For a split second, fear coursed through me. Had Bobby somehow gotten out already? But then I remembered that the police had taken him away, that he wouldn't be released so quickly, especially with the charges I'd filed. "That'll be Ed's nephew," I said, relaxing slightly. "He's coming to install the new locks." Sure enough, when I opened the door, with Helen standing close behind me, a rolling pin in hand just in case, there stood a young man in his 20s with a toolbox and the same nose as Ed Kowalski. "Mrs. Collins?" he asked, his voice respectful. "Uncle Ed sent me to help with those locks." "Come on in, young man," Dot called from the kitchen. "There's apple pie if you're hungry. We can talk about payment after you've had some." The nephew, Mike, as he introduced himself, did indeed have a slice of pie before getting to work. I sat at the kitchen table with my friends, listening to the sound of drilling and screw-driving from the front door, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. This was not how I'd imagined spending my Saturday, eating pie with my neighbors while a stranger installed security locks to keep my son out of my house. But life rarely turns out the way we imagine, does it? Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. Most often, it's just different, with its own unexpected blessings and challenges. By late afternoon, my house was secure again. New deadbolts on both doors, a peephole installed at eye level, window locks on every downstairs window. Mike had even fixed the dent in the wall where the side table had hit it, smoothing it out with some kind of putty that would need to be painted over but at least didn't look like a wound anymore. "Call Uncle Ed if you have any trouble with the locks," Mike said as he packed up his tools. "They're good quality, but sometimes they need a little breaking in." I paid him from the emergency money I kept in an envelope behind the sugar canister, less than I'd expected, true to Ed's promise of a family discount. When I tried to add a tip, Mike shook his head. "No, ma'am. Uncle Ed would skin me alive if I took extra from you. He said to tell you Ralph was one of the good ones, and he's just returning the favor." After Mike left, my friends stayed a while longer, helping put the house back in order. By the time they departed, with promises to check in tomorrow and bring me to church the following day, the sun was starting to set. The house felt different somehow. Still mine, but changed. Fortified. Not just against Bobby, but against the fear that had ruled me for too long. I stood in my living room as twilight deepened, looking at the plastic-covered window that would soon be replaced with new glass. Clean slate, fresh start. That's what I had now. At 68 years old, I was finally learning what freedom felt like. 3 months have passed since that night when everything changed. 3 months of quiet mornings with coffee on the back porch, watching cardinals flit between the maple branches. 3 months of dinner when I wanted, TV shows I choose myself, and no one criticizing the way I load the dishwasher. 3 months of learning who Maggie Collins is when she's not catering to someone else's moods and demands. The broken window was replaced within a week, double-paned and more secure than the old one. The kitchen walls now glow with the soft blue paint I chose myself, making the whole room feel like a clear summer sky. And yes, there's an orange tabby named Rusty curled up on the window seat, watching birds with the intense focus only cats can muster. Helen helped me adopt him from the shelter 2 weeks after Bobby left. "Every home needs a heartbeat," she said. And she was right. Bobby spent 3 days in jail before his arraignment. The judge granted the restraining order I requested. He can't come within 500 feet of me or my home for at least a year. He also faces charges for domestic assault and breaking and entering, though the court date keeps getting postponed. His court-appointed lawyer calls occasionally, trying to get me to drop the charges. I haven't. Some nights I lie awake wondering if I'm doing the right thing. Am I being too harsh? Should I have given him another chance? Then I touch the spot on my cheek where he hit me. No longer bruised, but the memory lingers in the skin. And I remember that I gave him 15 years of chances. 15 years of excuses and forgiveness that never led to change. I haven't cut Bobby out of my life entirely. We've exchanged a few letters. Actual handwritten letters, since I don't have one of those smartphones, and Bobby's not much for technology either. His first letter was angry, full of blame and self-pity. I almost didn't respond. But then came another, a week later, with something resembling an apology buried among the excuses. "I know I messed up, Mom," he wrote. "I never should have hit you. Dad would be ashamed of me, and he'd be right." It wasn't a perfect apology. He still complained about being thrown out on the street and said I'd overreacted by calling the police. But it was a start. A small crack in the wall of denial he'd built around himself. I wrote back with a simple truth. "I love you, Bobby, but I don't trust you." Trust, once broken, has to be earned back. That takes time and consistent effort. He's staying with his friend Dave for now, and has found work at an auto parts store on the west side. In his last letter, he mentioned starting to attend AA meetings. "Not saying I'm an alcoholic," he clarified quickly, "but maybe I could cut back some. It's a small step, but after decades of watching him make no steps at all, I'll take it. As for me, I'm discovering that life at 68 can still hold surprises." I joined Dot's water aerobics class at the Y, and though my arthritic knees protest sometimes, I feel stronger than I have in years. The ladies from church come over for coffee and Bible study every Wednesday morning, something I could never host when Bobby was here, demanding quiet for his late morning sleep after nights of drinking. Last month, I even went on that seniors' bus trip to Niagara Falls, standing there at the railing, watching tons of water thunder over the edge in a constant roar of power and beauty. I felt something shift inside me. A recognition that the world is vast and wonderful, and I've seen so little of it. That even at my age, there's time for new experiences, new joys. I took a selfie with my new little digital camera, a gift from Dot's granddaughter, who patiently taught me how to use it, and had it printed at the drugstore. It sits on my nightstand now, next to the old photo of Ralph and me in the same spot 30-some years ago. Different Maggies, same falls. The ladies at church don't ask about Bobby much anymore, for which I'm grateful. In the beginning, there were whispers, of course, sidelong glances at the bruise on my cheek, hushed conversations that stopped when I approached. But Cleveland folks are practical. They understand that sometimes family is complicated, that love doesn't always conquer all, at least not without some hard boundaries in between. Pastor Jim did come by about a month after everything happened. He sat at my kitchen table, admired the new blue walls, and accepted a cup of coffee and a slice of banana bread before getting to the point. "Some members of the congregation have expressed concern," he said carefully, stirring sugar into his coffee, "about the situation with Bobby. They wonder if pressing charges against your own son is in line with Christian forgiveness." I'd been expecting this conversation. Had rehearsed my answer in my head for weeks. "Pastor, I've forgiven Bobby in my heart," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean allowing someone to keep harming you. Even Jesus told his followers to shake the dust from their feet and move on when people wouldn't listen." Pastor Jim had smiled at that, a gentle acknowledgement of a theological point well made. The Bible also tells us to respect our parents, he added. Bobby seems to have forgotten that commandment. That was the extent of our discussion on the matter. No pressure to drop the charges, no sermon about turning the other cheek. Just understanding from a man who'd counseled enough troubled families to know that sometimes love looks like stepping back, not leaning in. Tonight, as I sit on my front porch swing watching the sun set over Maple Street, I feel a sense of peace that's been missing from my life for too long. The evening air is cool, but not cold, perfect for the light cardigan I've wrapped around my shoulders. Across the street, the Johnsons' grandchildren are playing a last game of tag before bedtime, their shrieks of laughter carrying on the gentle breeze. Helen is watering her prize roses next door, giving me a wave when she notices me looking. This is my life now, quiet, simple. Mine. I'm not naive enough to think the road ahead will be smooth. Bobby may never truly change. The charges against him might result in probation, or they might be dismissed entirely. The restraining order will eventually expire, and I'll have to decide whether to renew it. These are bridges I'll cross when I come to them. But I know this much. I won't go back to the way things were. I won't open my door to abuse, won't sacrifice my peace for someone else's comfort, not even my son's. Especially not my son's, because what kind of mother would I be if I continued to enable the worst parts of him? Sometimes the truest form of love is the hardest one to give, the love that says no more when boundaries are crossed. I've learned that it's never too late to start over, to reclaim your life and your sense of self. At 68, I'm not the same woman who raised Bobby, who stood by Ralph through sickness until death, who worked countless hours at the fabric store to keep a roof over our heads. That Maggie still exists within me, but she's been joined by a newer version, one who knows her worth, who speaks her mind, who sleeps in the master bedroom and paints her kitchen whatever color she pleases. As darkness falls and the streetlights flicker on one by one, I rock gently in the porch swing Ralph hung for me on our 10th anniversary. In a little while I'll go inside, lock my secure doors behind me, feed Rusty his evening meal, and perhaps read a chapter of the new mystery novel Dot loaned me. Small pleasures, but mine to choose. And before I say goodbye today, I want to share something important. I know these stories might seem distant from your reality, but they carry lessons we can all appreciate. If you felt a connection with what I've shared, consider subscribing to the channel. Not out of obligation, but because here we've created a space where stories like this can be told with honesty and respect. Each week, I bring new reflections that might bring a moment of clarity to your day. Don't feel pressured. This channel will be here when you need a friendly word or a different perspective. And if this story touched you somehow, leave a comment sharing which part resonated most with your experience. Your words might be exactly what someone needs to read today. Thank you for being here with me, and I hope to see you again in the next story. There's a line from Psalms that I've been thinking about lately. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. For 15 years after Ralph died, I was stuck in that long night of grief and fear and misplaced loyalty. But now I'm living in the morning. And while it's not perfect, my knees still ache when it rains. I still miss Ralph something fierce. And yes, I still worry about my troubled son. It's mine, my morning, my joy, my life. The stars are coming out now, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. I make a wish on the first one I see, just like I used to do as a little girl growing up in this very neighborhood. But unlike those childhood wishes for dolls or roller skates or a pony I knew I'd never get, tonight's wish is simpler and yet somehow more profound. I wish for the courage to keep choosing myself, day after day. To remember that even at 68, there are still pages left to be written in the story of Margaret Collins. And this time, I'll be the one holding the pen.